iTunes presents Meet the Filmmaker at the Apple Store.
Good evening, Apple Store, Soho. You guys doing all right tonight? How are we doing tonight? Doing good? Nice. I got a woo. If I get one woo, I can keep going. And the extended clap. I'm a fan of that as well. Wonderful. Good. All right, well, we got a good vibe going. We have a great event for you guys tonight. Really fun discussion lined up. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tony Goldwyn and this evening's guest moderator, David Schwartz from the Museum of Moving Image.
Good evening, everybody. My name is David Schwartz. The handsome one is Tony Goldwyn.
Hello.
And who you might recognize from the movie Ghost as an actor. He's also co-starring in Promises, Promises on Broadway. And he's a terrific director with movies including A Walk on the Moon and The Last Kiss. And this is a great piece of work, Conviction. So just tell us a bit about the story, because it is based on a true story. And it's one of these stories that is so incredible that you wouldn't believe it if a screenwriter made it up.
Right, yeah. Conviction's the true story of a woman named Betty Ann Waters who, as you can see, her brother was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. And they had been, had a terrible childhood, they were very poor, uneducated. She'd never made it through 10th grade. And they had been through 8 foster homes and sort of had raised each other, really. And when she was a young mother, Kenny, who'd been in and out of jail his whole life, he went away for this murder, and she couldn't survive with him in prison. And he'd lost all of his appeals and had tried to kill himself, and she made him swear to stay alive, and she would try to get him out. So she went back to school and to college and put herself through law school and became an attorney to try and figure out some way to get him out. And it took her 18 and a half years. And in the process, while she was in law school, she discovered there was this thing called DNA. And with the help of Barry Scheck and the Innocence Project, if you know about them, she managed to miraculously find some DNA evidence. And it was just a long odyssey to try and to free her brother. So the movie is really a love story between this brother and sister, Hilary Swank and Sam Rockwell. So that's the...
And when did you decide to turn it into a film? And then what was the process like in terms of thinking how you're going to turn it into a dramatically gripping movie instead of something that's sort of like a documentary?
Yeah, well, I've been working on this film for 9 years. I have done many things in the meanwhile, but it was 9 years ago that Kenny was released from prison, and it was all over the news, and my wife had seen a piece on 60 Minutes about it. And I was just fascinated with the story and moved by it and wanted to understand what this bond was between this brother and sister, that she would spend 18 years on an act of faith when he easily could have been guilty. So I tracked down Betty Ann and actually tracked down it turned out there was a producer already securing her rights, Andy Karsh, who's my partner on it. And he and I got together and he liked my ideas and we teamed up, and at that time it was it was at a different studio, and they hired me to direct and develop it. And we brought on a screenwriter who had written my first film, A Walk on the Moon, Pamela Gray, and we just started spending a lot of time with Betty Ann and hearing her stories, and then figuring out how to make a film of it. And the real trap of a movie like this, the difficulty is you think, oh well, this could so easily be a kind of not sort of a very conventional TV movie type, approach to this subject, which obviously I had no interest in doing, and I didn't think it did the material justice or her justice. So we wanted to tell a very honest, complicated story that had a lot of tension in it, where you don't know, as you watch this movie, you're actually not, you don't know whether Kenny did it or not. It's very complex, that. And the darker edges of her experience, I thought, were much more lifelike. And I guess the only other thing I would say is that when people do heroic things in life, while they're doing them, they seem insane. People that do extraordinary things, until they've achieved them, we look at them and go, that person's nuts. What are they doing? They're sacrificing all of this. They're obsessive. They're myopic. They're unreasonable people. And so Betty Ann was like that. So I thought that was an interesting aspect to one of the, you know, a way that I wanted to be honest about it, as opposed to it being like, oh, look at this wonderful woman and let's watch her, let's cheer as she, you know,
I mean, not to give too much away, but it really impacts her marriage. Her husband thinks that she's
it makes her
nuts.
marriage tough, and she has a tough time. You know, she's trying to raise 2 kids and support herself, and you know, she works at a bar, and but she, you know, is just committed and believes in her brother.
Let's just talk about these 2 amazing actors. Hilary Swank, you know, we know that she had a lot of determination in her life. You know, I think we know about the fact that she lived in a trailer park in Los Angeles. You know,
In Seattle, actually.
Oh, in
Yeah,
Seattle,
Bellingham, Washington.
before she started her acting career. But she was somebody who's always had this kind of determination. Could you talk about how she connected to this role, and then how she prepared for it? I mean, it just seems such a great. It's one of her great roles.
Yeah, when I saw $1 Million Baby, I knew that Hillary was the person for this part, and thankfully she felt the same way. Initially, Hillary had been a little hesitant. She loved the script, but had played several true-to-life characters, and said to me, you know, I'm not sure I'm ready to do another one just yet. And I was in the middle of filming The Last Kiss, and I said, well, let's just wait. I'm busy doing this other movie, and I was totally fixated on her. So about a year later, I called her again, and we sat down and talked, and she said, you know, I've realized that I was put on this earth to play certain types of people, and this is one of them. This is what I was meant to do. And so her preparation process is extraordinary. Hillary works just harder than anybody I've ever met. You know, interestingly, before that meeting when we sat down to talk about the script, you know, normally when you send an actor a script to consider, you know, they'll read it and maybe they'll read it twice, but you know, you'll sit down and have a preliminary conversation and see how it feels. And it's no big deal, no commitment either way. And with her, we kept trying to schedule a meeting, and her agent said, well, she doesn't have enough time to prepare for the meeting, so we have to put you off for a couple of weeks. I said, well, how much time does she need to prepare for the meeting? We just need to chat, no pressure. He said, no, you don't understand. You've never had a meeting with anyone like you're going to have with Hillary Swank. He said, she needs a week to prepare for the meeting with you. And I said, really? He said, yeah, and she's busy, so she wants to clear the week, because when you sit down with her, she will know whether, you know, it's not like you're going to drift and she'll sort of decide. She'll be very clear. So she spent a week preparing to meet me, to have a conversation. And she must have read the script 5 or 6 times. And we sat down and we spent 4.5 hours together talking about it. And it was an exhaustive meeting about it. And she was so dialed in to what the movie was about. To me and for her, it was the same. You know, we were both very moved by this theme and this material and the story and this relationship between this brother-sister love story, really, is what it is. And then, you know, sometime later, when, you know, we were putting the money together independently to make this film, and when we got the money together, she said, you know, I need 2 months to prepare before we start shooting. I have to have that space. I thought, 2 months? God, what would I do as an actor if I had to spend 2 months? And she did, though. Every single day, our dialect coach would show up at her house, and they'd work on Betty Ann's dialect, because Betty Ann's from Massachusetts, lives in Rhode Island. She has, you know, we wanted the dialects to be very, very real and specific. So she would, you know, every day we sent a dialect coach to spend a few hours with Betty Ann and record her telling stories. She had this 2.5-hour tape that Hillary memorized. That was how she worked on the dialect. Before she even started looking at the scenes, she worked on this tape of the real Betty Ann. And they would send me little clips of her to see if I was happy with what was going on. And she memorized the entire 2.5 hours in Betty Ann's voice as Betty Ann. And that's sort of how she embodied the character before she even started working on the script. And then every day she'd spend, you know, probably 8 hours a day preparing for this before we ever got to rehearsal, before we got even near filming. So she is, by the time she showed up, you know, for our first, I remember feeling this, the first day of filming, you know, most actors, myself included, when you start filming, you know, I was trying to start with a scene that's not too challenging so people can kind of relax into it and get their bearings and sort of find their way into the character. And, you know, almost every actor is like that. With Hillary, the first shot of the movie, she was utterly the woman. It was uncanny. It wasn't that she was doing anything extraordinary or exceptional or exciting. she was in a law school classroom, and she had to stand up and answer a question of the professor. But when she stood up and opened her mouth to answer this rather routine question, it almost took my breath away, because it was utterly Betty Ann. It was the woman. It was completely fully realized and relaxed and integrated. And I had taken that for granted, because, as I say, most actors, you give them a lot of slack to get relaxed into it, and she was just there. She's quite extraordinary, Hillary.
Yeah, I think we've all seen movies that are set in New England and they have these accents, and it sort of takes you out of the movie because it feels a little phony, but this works.
Yeah, I mean, she worked really hard, and it's a real pet peeve of mine, maybe because I'm an actor, but if dialects are not exactly right, they just drive me insane. And especially it's an insult to people that are from that part of the world, and it's also, I believe, like, if you're telling a story, movies need to be real and need to feel authentic in every nuance and every detail, and the way someone speaks should be how they would really speak. So, I mean, I always have a dialect coach every day on the set. We're having worked extensively with every actor, so everyone's from the same world, and a lot of people don't do that. Some people are like, well, if you want to do an accent, do it. We'll see, Yeah. I mean, great directors like Clint Eastwood, just doesn't interest them. I think on Mystic River, he just told everyone, yeah, if you want to do an accent, bring it. But that's your problem. That's your job, which I respect. But it's, and if you could watch Mystic River, as great a film as that is, everyone's kind of doing something a little different.
Yeah. Now, Sam Rockwell's performance is so critical to this movie, because you do have to believe, from the audience standpoint, that he could have committed the murder or not. Mm-hmm. And so you have to find an actor who has a sort of edge and is kind of dangerous, but you also have to believe this love relationship. So how did you think of him, and if you could talk about working with him?
Yeah, well, very much what you just described. Sam was actually, I assume some of you guys are familiar with Sam's amazing body of work, but
like Confessions of a Dangerous Mind and Moon, he starred.
Moon last year he was amazing in, and Frost Nixon, and so many other great pieces of work. Charlie's Angels, Iron Man 2. Sam, when I years ago, when Pamela, the screenwriter, and I were first meeting with the real Betty Ann and hearing her stories and finding out about her life and finding out about her brother, we realized that the casting of the brother was going to make or break the movie. That if we didn't have the right guy playing Kenny, the movie would not work. We were confident that we could find a great Betty Ann, because she's the heroine and she's the central character, but at that time I said, we need an actor like Sam Rockwell, and Pamela actually wasn't that familiar with his work and said, really? And it was what you described, that I needed someone who has a kind of madness about them and an unpredictability. That Sammy is an actor who, you can fall in love with him, and he has great charm and humor, and yet at the same time, he can be a little crazy, and you can believe that there's a volatility. And this is a guy you have to believe, you have to fall in love with him, and understand his sister's love for him. But at the same time believe that because he has a very violent temper, that he could have actually committed murder. And Sam really does. I mean, I'm trying not to be biased. I think it's his best work. It's really an extraordinary performance, what he does in this movie.
Could you talk about your own personal attachment to this material? On one hand, you've got the issue. I mean, this is a film that gets people thinking about the death penalty and about this Innocence Project. But there also is this very personal story between the brother and sister. So what was it that attached you to it so deeply?
Yeah, that's what affected me. I remember when I was a small kid, about 6 or 7, I don't know. I remember having a pretty morbid conversation with myself about what I could survive without in my life. Could I survive the death of my parents? And I decided I probably could. It would be very traumatic and horrible, but I could probably survive that. And I could survive if I lost my